I'm Matt Reynolds, and this is my podcast.
I can do the job, but running the business is quite difficult. What a lot of tradesmen lack, and I was probably one of them, is business skills.
I don't mind making mistakes. You learn from your mistakes.
Information is all around you in the minds of people that work beside you.
Welcome to Trench Talk. I'm Matt Reynolds. I'm a plumber, and this week, largely thanks to past guest Steve McKnight's recommendation from episode 9, Brendon Nichols joins me on the podcast. The idea of these discussions, for those of you joining us for the first time, is to go into the trenches and talk not with people who are orchestrating from some lofty perspective, but to those high performers who are actually in the trenches honing their craft. That has included guests from the worlds of business, sport and entertainment, all of whom are on the front lines doing amazing things. This episode is all about business and making more money. Brendon built a successful business early in his career marketing real estate in the Sydney CBD before becoming a best-selling author published by industry giant Harper Collins. He's appeared in the media dozens of times and about 1 million people tuned in to watch the ABC documentary on him. Today, Brendon's business is training people on how to get out of the rat race, which has included tens of thousands across 3 continents. His specialty is teaching business owners how to raise their income while simultaneously reclaiming control of their time. We discuss his definition of success and avoiding the common traps, learning strategies and structures, being a no-star, 5-star guy, using meditation and getting clear in your own mind, making decisions, getting repeat business, and the first thing you need to do each and every morning to help make sure your business remains profitable. If you'd like to know more about Brendon and what he does, you can find him at brendonnichols.com. Please remember to hit the subscribe button inside your chosen podcast player if you really enjoy this episode to get all future releases of Trench Talk. Enjoy my chat with Brendon Nichols. Brendon Nichols, thanks for doing this.
Hey Matt, you're welcome.
Now for some context, we're both at home today. Now I'm in Melbourne and you're up on the northern New South Wales coast, so we're doing this interview via Skype. I approached you after hearing about your work through Steve McKnight, who was on the podcast, and we spoke briefly for the first time last week after you had listened to, I think you said the first episode of this podcast. It might have been more, but definitely the first one. And after our initial pleasantries, if you like, we got into the conversation, and this is you talking to me. You said, I'm not really sure you want me on your show.
Yeah, that's correct.
Now, why wouldn't I want you on my show?
Well, I suppose my point of view is a bit different, Matt, than some of the success speakers, and that's not to take anything away from them. And I'm not including Steve McKnight in that because he's a friend and he's fabulous. Probably the best to give you my history is that I originally started a little real estate company out in the southwest of Sydney, and I had no experience at all. I didn't do well in school. I did okay in school, ended up passing in school, but I didn't like school. I didn't like school. The teachers didn't particularly like me either. So it was a mutual relationship between us. And anyway, eventually, after a few little fits and starts with different entrepreneurial activities, I started this little tiny real estate company in the southwest of Sydney. No experience. I went in under somebody else's license, but it was my business. I took out a loan of $10,000, which back then was all the money in all the world. I borrowed that money, all of it, from the bank. And so with the first month of running this business, I'd made no sales. And then it was one night in particular when I was sitting around my dining room table. I had a 3-year-old daughter at the time. I had no money. I was just on the verge of going broke. And I had what I called a snap point. And so a snap point is where you can't take it any longer. You know, I've found out of training, I've trained tens and tens of thousands of people around the world on 3 different continents now for over 26, 27 years. And I've found that the ones that change have a snap point. They just finally get to a state where they can't stand things any longer. And I had one of those. And to cut a long story short, within another couple of months, within 3.5 months of starting that business was the most successful selling real estate agency in the area. And I ended up moving on from there. I ended up moving into the city. We're going back into the 80s now, late 80s, and I moved into the city, and I had a project marketing company right in the middle of Sydney. it was the full box and dice. I had a Porsche, I had a Mercedes, and I was doing what I called success. And I'm now trying to answer your question about why you may not want to have me on the show. And at the time, I was studying every success technique that I could. And don't get me wrong, I was making good money, but I was also deemed very successful. So here's my point of view. My point of view is that most of what's being taught out there, a lot of it is around being successful. Successful is a perception. It's a perception of what you might think of me or what I would think of you. And so we see a lot of quotes from people like, I have a $7 million business and I'm employing 87 people, and we regard that person as successful. But having consulted, there's a lot of difference between being rich and successful, and that's what I'm about to get into. Having consulted a lot of different businesses, I would go into these businesses that were very successful, and I found a lot of these people were, one, working profoundly long hours, and two, they weren't actually making any money. There's an old saying, that net profit is actually the only sanity in business. And so my point of view in running a business, and there's a reason for running a business I'll get to in a minute if you're interested in making money out there. My point of view is that there's only two reasons to run a business, is to make money and to make a contribution. And what I mean by making a contribution is that you're contributing to the lives of people that you sell to. That they're the two values which I run a business. And why do we want to make money? Well, we only want to make money for two reasons, and that's to get a life and give a life. So I donate thousands of dollars a year to charity, but I also have a life. I've been running my business this way for 27 odd years, where I take 3 months holiday a year. And, usually I'll go skiing for a couple of months a year, and I go surfing in really exotic places. I might go and stay in 6-star hotels in Europe. But the business is only used for that purpose. The only purpose of the people that I train, we just want to make a contribution and we want to make money. We don't necessarily want to be successful. Now, the myth is that if you are successful, then you'll make money. And my experience is that sometimes that's true, but for a lot of people, it's not true. They have all the trappings of success. And these are thousands of people that I've, consulted either in my seminars or in group consultations. So when I said to you, tongue in cheek, you may not want to have me on the show, is because of that very reason. I find that a lot of people, success in many ways, whatever is at the deepest level of your motivation, your inner drivers, I call them your drivers, that will come to fruition. If you want success and you're driven by that, you will be successful. If you're driven just to make money and make a contribution, you may not be deemed successful. I mean, I have clients that have got 1 or 2 or no employees and make 7 figures income a year, and they're invisible. They're driving ordinary cars. They live in an ordinary house, but they've got millions and millions of dollars in passive income real estate. And so they wouldn't be deemed as successful. And so for a lot of people, they would rather take that road of recognition. So there's a long-winded way of answering your question. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. So how do you describe for someone who doesn't know you exactly what you do today? Are you still running businesses, or are you just in the education space?
No, I'm just in the education. What happened for me personally is that I had, about 25 years ago, I had this very successful business in the city, and then I got asked by several of the biggest speakers in the world to speak at their conferences on how I had become successful making money, and then I spoke at those, and I found that the truthful answer to your question is that I was very good at real estate, but I never felt that it was my glove. I believe that a lot of us have a glove, a career that when you put your hand into it, it feels like a glove, like, oh, I was born to do this. And with real estate, it just felt something that I was good at, but it never really felt like me. I didn't relate to a lot of the other real estate agents. I was a complete maverick. I never went through the traditional education of most real estate agents. I didn't dress like them. I did everything completely differently, and it never really felt like me. I mean, we did great work, but when I started teaching seminars, it felt like me. It felt like this is what I was meant to do. So my business now is basically just in the education field, but having come from a successful business background, it gives me a little bit of an edge compared to a lot of other trainers. There are a lot of other good trainers, by the way, but it gives me a different viewpoint when I'm training people having actually come from a successful business background rather than just being a trainer only.
Because we hear so much that, one of the, quote, secrets, if you like, to success is doing something you love, aligning your passion with something that earns a lot of money, but you went about it a little bit differently. You used the business to get you to a point where you no longer need to work anymore, so then you could follow your true passion, if you like. Is that a fair statement?
At that stage, I would say that I wasn't completely financially independent, like, before I switched into education. I mean, I was making really good money in real estate, and I had a lot of success, but that's how I learned this lesson about success and money, because I was making really good money. What I find about people who are driven by a success driver is they're really good at making money. They're really good at spending it too. They're really good at spending it on cars and stuff. And so I fell more into that category. And so I believe it's a little controversial. I teach people what I call strategies, but I teach them structure. So this is probably useful for your listeners, because if you either want to become successful or if you want to become wealthy, you're going to have to do a combination of learning strategies and structure. So, for example, if you were a real estate investor, you would need strategies on, how to specifically invest. Would you be building a granny flat out the back, or would you be doing, a sixplex, unit development? All these specific strategies on how you would do it. But if you were a business person, you would need the same. So, as a business person, I teach people, there's things you need to know. How do I do a Facebook ad? How do I write long copy sales letter? How do I do, how would I do publicity? I mean, I have one client I taught a technique to that's got over $700,000 worth of free publicity. And these are specific strategies. But more importantly, what I teach than the strategies is your structure, which is your mindset, your habits, your beliefs. And that's actually, that will determine the course of your entire life. You can know all the strategies in the world. And this, we're now getting into something that's not my opinion. This is empirical fact based on me training over 30,000 businesses. Unless your structure is right, your habits, your mindsets, beliefs, those strategies never seem to come to fruition. So primarily what I do in a lot of my advanced groups is that, yes, we're giving people either that want to get into business or are in business, we are giving them cutting-edge strategies, particularly marketing strategies, direct response marketing strategies. But most of the work that we're doing is attempting to change their structure. And so we've seen massive gains by combining this strategy structure approach. Does that make sense? And so I suppose my first student when I was training was myself, And
it probably needs to be that way in a lot of aspects, doesn't it? Because I guess if you go through it and you work it out for yourself, you by right get the option, if you like, I suppose, to share that with other people in a truthful and ethical way.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to just give, I would never ever say to somebody, what everyone secretly wants is to get rich quick. Well, I've never seen that happen. I mean, maybe it does happen, but I've never seen it happen. The truth is it takes work. And if we analyze where the vast majority of people became extremely successful or wealthy, one of the two or both, you'll nearly always find the answer is business. Now, there are exceptions to the rule, people will often say to me, well, hang on, what about Warren Buffett? And I go, yeah, he's an investor, but he invests in businesses. And so this is not a very sexy answer. People just want a really simple scheme. They want some scheme that they can do that is going to make them rich in a few months. Well, I've explored, I have studied hundreds and hundreds of books and explored many, many different modalities. And I'm sure it does happen, but I've never seen it happen. And I think that ultimately running a business is the way that you can achieve the dreams that you truly want.
I want to ask you a little bit more about this structure in just a minute, but you called them snap points before. Can you tell me about the day that you decided that your Porsche was no longer the thing for you and that you'd focus more on people?
Well, I think that was all a valid stage for me. When I was younger and, we're talking about in the 80s and everything there's a lot of excess in the 80s. We all had suits with giant padded shoulders and everything was big, so it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. I mixed with a lot of high flyers but then one day for me, I started looking at my values and I went, well, it's about really looking what's actually true for you. And I like family. I spend a lot of time with my family. I like close friends and I like adventures. And so even when I was young, when I got out of school, the first thing I did was just went away surfing for 2 years. I waved goodbye to my parents and just had the most amazing adventure. I was Madagascar and remote parts of Africa and all over the world. And I've always loved adventure. I love skiing, I love surfing, I love upmarket hotels, but I'm a what I call no-star, 5-star guy. So I don't like the middle. Yeah, so if you tell me you're going for a holiday to the Big Banana at Coffs Harbour, I'm not that excited. But if you told me we're going way out in the desert to a remote area and we're going to camp under the stars, I'm excited. If you told me I'm going to an upmarket hotel, now you got me excited. So I just started looking at all of the things that truly gave me pleasure. And these were the things that I truly got a kick out of life. And I really decided that I wasn't just going to bother at all about what other people's version of success looked like or recognition or what it looked like. And out of that decision, things just started to fade away. And it's not a popular discussion. I think actually money is not a popular discussion, Matt. I think the reason we have so many success books compared to books on actually making money, the actual specifics of making money is it's not a politically correct conversation, but it's a real conversation. Because try going to a travel agent, walking into a travel agent and saying, look, I want to go away on the trip of my dreams and I'm really a successful person. They're not going to care about that. They're just going to say, well, show me the money. And so I'm not all that politically correct. Like a lot of my students come to me and it sometimes it makes my heart bleed. There's these people that are working 60 hours a week running a business, killing themselves, and they're just on the brink. And for me, it's about like, hey, let me show you a way where it's possible, just possible, to work less hours and make more money. Would you be interested in that? Now, there is work involved in there. I'm not saying you can't work at all, but about working smarter rather than longer hours and harder. And then quite often I'm encouraging them, to eventually, yes, build up their financial independence through passive income real estate. That's a whole other conversation, by the way. A lot of my students were very much into that the cash from the business is going to build up your financial independence through some kind of passive income investment, so you're not reliant on the business. But I'm also encouraging them to go away, have a great holiday, take the family. I have a lot of family people that come. And so this is just the way I look at life. I think life's really short. I think I said to you in the initial conversation, when you're on your deathbed, the last 20 breaths of your life is not going to be, oh, I wish I'd spent more time in the office.
I think Steve said something, it might have been the exact thing, but definitely along those lines when we had a chat too.
No one's going to be doing that. And so I've had I've been very fortunate. I've had this phenomenal life of just, we could spend a whole podcast on just the adventures that I've had, skiing the most extreme lift access terrain in all of North America and, just mind-blowing stuff. But all of this is possible because I just made a decision. I know, okay, I'm not going to mention their name, but one of the top 10 richest people on the planet, I know the guy that used to do his IT very well. And he told me that this particular person, who's a household name, used to work 7 days a week. So I tipped my hat to him. Good on you. But I don't want to do it. I don't want to work 7 days a week. I've got other things to do in life that create more of an amazing life. And yeah, that's the way I look at life.
One of the seemingly very important things to get right when you set your goals, embark on a business or whatever your journey might be is actually to clearly define your own version of success and what you want to get out of what you're putting your time, energy and effort into. Do you work on that? Is that one of the things that you start with when people initially come to you?
That would be one of the starting points. And let me say on that while it's a starting point, it's sometimes very difficult because if you really truly examine popular culture, like what people regard as successful, like I've got, somebody's got more likes, so they're successful on their Facebook page, or what is written in popular literature, like for example, some of the women say to me that I get, they say what we find really hard is that there's all these articles in women's magazines about the successful woman. She's got a career on television. She works 60 hours a week, but she's still got time for her friend who's just going through a divorce, and she still gets the kids off to school, and she's the perfect mother and the perfect wife, and we feel all this pressure. And I go, well, yeah, but that's the success. It's like we're spread so thin. No one's got any time anymore. So the first thing I do is, and people have got less and less time. We've got this amazing culture, and yet very few people really, really get to explore it. Our rates of depression are going up. Our levels of obesity are going up. We have all of these problems, and not all of them, but a lot of them is because there's so much stress and so much pressure. And so and when we examine a lot of the people who are training people in success, when I examine their lives, and some of them are great trainers, they're just working 6 and 7 days a week, 60, 70 hours a week. It's like everybody's fallen into this trap of let's just kill ourselves and not have a life, and then we'll go away for a 2 or 3 week holiday. And so this is very pervasive in the culture, and it's about trying to extricate people from this really belief system to get their time back, to actually have more leisure, and to have a life that they really want. But if you ask yourself, out of all the successful people that you know, how many people have that life of leisure or a lack of stress, you're not going to find a lot of people, because usually what happens is that as they get on the train, that train is so addictive that they just want to stay on the train.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because one of the things that I've been thinking about and asking about lately is on the topic of being, I suppose, mindful as you grow through your business or life journey, if you like, and being aware that some of the things that help you get on the train, if you like, or that you actually get rewarded for very early in your career can actually lead to your downfall if you're not wary of them as you grow. And what I mean by that is that when you start out, there's definitely going to be a point where you need to really work to get off the ground. But if you keep working with that mentality and focus, if you like, then you never get to enjoy it later. So you kind of need to change as you go through your journey. Does it make sense what I'm saying?
It makes complete sense. And so, people talk about happiness. And I go, well, money per se on its own is not going to create happiness. However, when you walk onto the plane and you turn left into business class rather than turning right, that will create some happiness. I can guarantee that. So, however, if you want happiness, as you go along the trail, you'll find that you actually have 4 lives that you need to cram into this life. You have a financial life, so you need to be able to have the ability to make money. You have a spiritual life, that's the second life that you'll lead. And whatever that means to people, it could mean many different things to people. The third life that you have is a physical life, and that's your health. That's the ability to have the time to exercise, to eat really well. And then your fourth life is a relational life, and that's the time that you have to spend with your significant other, your children, your family, your close friends. And happiness is really achieved by combining all 4 of those lives. The financial life or the career aspect of your life is just one part of the quadrant. And at different times of your life, it's like if you imagine that there are 4 quadrants of a circle, those 4 lives. The circle will turn and one of those quadrants will be at the top, which simply means that now I need to pay attention to this particular part of my life. So in the beginning, when you start a business, the financial quadrant's at the top and you need to put in a lot of work. But then as you go along and you get particularly good at leverage, which some people aren't good, when they start leveraging or delegating things out, then you have more time. And then you start looking at the other quadrants and you go, well, what needs attention now? And really in an ideal day, in any ideal day, there's a little bit of those 4 quadrants in every single day. So, for example, it's not a subject I'd usually talk about on a podcast, but, I start my day with a meditation practice, and then I'll go down the beach and I'll do some exercise, and I do all of it. And then I come back and I eat. I'm a vegetarian. I eat organic food. I'll come back and have a really great breakfast, and now I start my day. I don't just wake up and get on the computer. So it's about having balance in all of these particular areas, and that gives you more longevity.
Do you have any suggestions on, let's say that your financial quadrant is at the top, if you like?
Yeah.
Now, as that wheel turns, to use your analogy, and you move into, say, as you said, the spiritual quadrant,
yeah.
What do you need to do in each quadrant to move with efficiency into the next quadrant? Because if you're sort of plugging holes in each of your quadrant, do you have to systemize each area of your life before you move on to grow quicker?
Yeah. If it's about systematizing, then the answer is yes.
Okay.
So, for example, I am more of what I teach people is that financial quadrant. That's what I'm really teaching people. So there's other people out there that you can go to if you want to improve your health. There's doctors you can go to. There's different specialists that you can go to. But just in a really broad nutshell, then if you want to be healthy, then it is about having a system. It's about you've got to have some kind of exercise program, and you've got to have a what you eat program. There's got to be something around those things that are relatively systematized, or like, for example, I have a trainer who trains Olympic level athletes, a lot of guys from the AFL, gold medal winning athletes. He's one of the best trainers, one of the best personal trainers in Australia. And which is another tip, by the way, I only ever go to the best. And so I have a training program that he's designed for me, like a gym training program. So that's a systematized program, if that's answering it. We're talking about, and all these things, by the way, complement each other. These things are not in isolation. If you're more healthy, then that's naturally going to affect your financial quadrant because you're going to simply have more energy. And so, some people, the spiritual quadrants is incredibly personal, and I'm not about to, that's something that somebody has to figure out for themselves. But for some person, it might be going to church. For another person, it might be walking on the beach. For some people, it might be a meditation program. It's something that really just, what we would say is that the benefits of any kind of spiritual program is it's something that moves your mind to being less busy. So the great paradox is that the most successful people in the world have the ability to have certain times of their life when their mind is not full of thoughts. I had, and it's true with sports people. You know, we have sports people who talk about being in the zone. And when they ask them about being in the zone, they say, well, there's nothing in my mind. My mind is blank, which allows them to operate at a higher level. You know, Michael Jordan once, when he was playing for the Chicago Bulls, he was the Bulls were way ahead on points, and he was on the halfway line, and he had his back to the hoop, and he threw the ball over his head. He couldn't even see that because he's facing the other way, threw the ball over his head, and at the exact moment that the ball went through the hoop, he punched his fist in the air. And so after the game, the interviewer said, you know, Michael, how did you do that? It was the most phenomenal thing anybody's ever seen. It was like miraculous. How did you do that? And Jordan just looked at him and said, I was in the zone. And so these are moments. So, you know, another person, Jim Carruthers, who was Australia's first world boxing champion, once told me, he said, Brendon, when you're in the ring, if you think, you're dead. And so these are different stages. This is how the spiritual quadrant can actually impact any of our other quadrants by just having a mind that's less busy, less stressed. So in that state, we make really clear decisions.
Yeah, that's what I was alluding to with my question, was that if you do systemize each stage as much as you can, or you work out financially how to do things, or spiritually what works for you, it then, I suppose, frees up time and space in your mind to be able to go forward and then work on your next challenge, I guess you'd say.
Yeah. And then the other thing about having a clear mind is having a really clear outcome. It's very difficult. You know, most people kind of think they know where they want to go, but when you really examine them, they have multiple outcomes in their mind. You know, like initially people will come into a training and they go, well, I just want to be rich. But when we actually examine those people, like, we find that they want to be rich, but they want this. They don't want to work. They want it easy. And they also want this as well. And they want to be famous. They've got so many outcomes in their mind. And what we find about really successful people is they have one outcome. One outcome. They have a really, really clear outcome of what they want to create. And so, I mean, what I just talked about then in the last 30 seconds, we could talk about that, I'm not exaggerating, for 2 hours. It's such a loaded subject, and it sounds so simple. But for most people to get very, very clear on precisely what they want, that's actually 95% of the battle. If you can get somebody really clear on precisely what they want as a primary outcome without a whole bunch of secondary outcomes in the way, then they get it. You know, because for most people, they go, well, I want to be rich, but I don't want to work that hard, or gee, I don't want to have to confront anything, or I don't want. These are all secondary outcomes.
Yeah, I think it's come up before on this podcast actually that when you start out in life, you tend to have a really long list, and you work a little bit on each of those items, and you figure out pretty quickly that if you want to go a long way, you need very few items on your list, and you want to work really hard on each one. So let's say that a business owner, the typical business owner who comes to you, you have a look at their mindset, you readjust, I guess, their focus, if you like, and they decide to embark on this journey of change and growth with you on a nuts and bolts level in their actual business. In what aspect do you work on first, and do you have a system you start to go through? How does it work on a really practical level?
Well, I work on both of those strategies and structure concurrently. But if we take a really simple example of working with their strategies, and which also dovetails into their structure or mindset. Most business people have got, well, first I need to explain something called the Nexus Point. So the only time that you make money in a business is when you or your agent interacts with a client or customer. So what's your agent? Your agent is your website, your Facebook ad, your print ad, telephone salespeople. These are your agents, because the only thing that produces, maintains, keeps, and upsells a client or customer is some marketing device. because it's a marketing device. Your advertising that initially brings your customer to you. What also keeps your customer is a marketing device. So, for example, if you've got an email database, how regularly do you keep contact with your clients or customers? You know, like like, for example, if you take a plumber or an acupuncturist or anybody really, one of the first questions I say is, okay, you've got these clients. How often do you stay in contact with them, or do you just wait for them to call you when there's a problem? Well, hardly anybody stays in contact with their clients, you know, or sends them something. That's a marketing device. And so, I mean, there's another hour conversation there, but anything that brings you with your client or customer is what we call a nexus point. Yeah?
Yep.
So the first thing that we do is I go, show me the list of what you do in a day. And I go, well, then I'll find somewhere on the list that there's a couple of nexus points, you know, like create an ad or create some free publicity or put in a Facebook ad or something. I go, when do you do that? They go, well, when I get around to it, I've got to get all the other stuff done. Now, that's about 98% of business people, period. What I say to them is no. The first thing that you do when you walk in the door is the day before, you write your list. Yeah, whatever time you knock off, right, the last thing you do is you write your list, and at the top of that list you put 2 nexus point activities, and you do those first when you walk in the door. And they find that so hard to do initially, because that's when you've got all your energy. Because usually what happens is that it never gets done. It's on the list, and I've got to write that ad, but it gets put off to tomorrow. And then it's like under deadline. Oh, I've got to write a Facebook ad, or I've got to contact my clients. I've got to set up an email database. So, and it's under pressure, and they do a really shoddy job with it. So I say you do it when you first walk in the door. You train your brain that this is the most important thing, because the nexus point activity is going to create money. Teamwork is important. Yeah, leadership meetings, they're important. Accounting, it's important. But those things don't make you money. It's only marketing, sales and marketing that make you money, because we're interacting with a client or customer. So we do those things first. And so that's how I would specifically train them in the beginning. I mean, there's a lot more to it than that. But if anybody's out there listening and you forgot everything that I told you and you only did that, that's enough.
Yeah, because it's a really different mentality, isn't it? Because that's a focus on moving your business forward rather than simply being in the minutiae of reacting to people walking the door, ringing phones, answering email, that sort of thing.
Yeah, most business people are just caught up in reaction all the time. But they're doing it. Why do people not put those nexus points, those marketing devices first? Well, the answer is they do it because of their mindset or structure. Because what they're wanting to do is something different than what they're telling most people that they want to do. They're saying that they want to be in... Look, there's a big survey done recently, and they found that most business people originally choose to get into running a business because they can be their own boss. Well, I'm just going to tell you that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard in my entire life. It's like, you'll end up your own boss, all right, but instead of working for 40 hours a week and have somebody telling you what to do, you're now telling yourself what to do for 60 hours a week and struggling to make money. If that's where you're going to start, or if you want to be known as recognition, that's what you're going to get, a lot of recognition. I'm just trying to tell people you're in business to create a phenomenal contribution to your clients, phenomenal, and to make money. Now, when I talk about a phenomenal contribution, it's probably, do we have the time at the moment for me to tell a quick story here about that directly relates to that?
We love stories, Brendon, so go for it.
Okay, so I got a friend of mine, Ian Hatchet, and I call this principle the hatchet ratchet. Okay, so Ian, because the way of really ratcheting up your business, because people talk about customer service, but this is what I call extreme customer service. So Ian was the manager of there's a ski town that I go to pretty much every year in Colorado. And it's an obscure ski town. They've got very, very extreme terrain, which I kind of love. And so Ian was the manager for the ski rental shop in this town. And this particular ski rental shop, this is where people come in and they rent ski boots and skis and poles and stuff to go out skiing. So Ian there was an independent company that used to do the customer service surveys on who had the best customer service of any ski resort in North America. And there was 66 ski resorts. Within those ski resorts were massive ski resorts like Whistler and Vail, and that had way more range than what Ian could provide in his little ski shop, way more infrastructure. Ian won the best customer service in North America for his little shop every year for 5 consecutive years. It's actually physically impossible up against the really big ski resorts that have all of this money to throw at their ski rental department. So I sat down with Ian one time. I said, how did you do this? How did you train your people to do this? And he looked at me and he just said one word. He said, love. Now, I know there's business people out there probably putting a finger down their throat, wanting to throw up. But I don't mean ushy-wushy love. For Ian, that was actually really real. And he said, Brendon, if you're going to tell people about this story, he said, you've got to tell them that I wasn't doing it as a technique. Yeah, I wasn't doing them as a technique. So I was doing it because I genuinely, and he does. Ian is one of those people that genuinely loves and cares about people. And out of this ski rental shop made so much money. But you can't think Tom Hopkins, who was the number one sales trainer and number one speaker in the early 80s on the planet and was a mentor, phenomenal trainer back then, he said, you've got to get the dollar signs out of your eyes. So the paradox is when you're making a contribution, you can't do it to just make a buck because people will recognize that about you. I mean, what I've done, to give you an example, I enrolled all my programs at the moment, they're full, yeah? And so I have a huge people that come back year after year. So I enrolled quite an expensive coaching program, and then those people are on the program. I waited a few weeks, and then I told them that in addition to what they'd already enrolled for, I was giving them this phenomenal bonus, and it's a surprise. I can't tell you, but it's a phenomenal bonus. And so my clients will often post stuff on my forum like, Brendon under-promises and over-delivers. And that's what I try and do in business. I try to under-promise and over-deliver. And if I'm not over-delivering, I'm doing something wrong. The benefit of that is I get a massive repeat client that comes back to me. Because one of the most expensive, but you can't do this because it's a trick. This is the paradox. This is the hatchet. This is the trick in the hatchet ratchet. It can't be a trick. It's got to be genuine. It's got to be from the heart. And this is something that we don't often talk about in business, but we should talk about it more. And because one of your most expensive things is an initial client acquisition. Much easier to keep, not very expensive to keep a client, but hard to acquire one and very expensive.
So after the typical people that you work with start to really focus in on what they identify to be their nexus points,
yeah.
What happens to the business after that typically? Is there a usual sort of journey that the business goes on after they shift that focus?
Well, for a lot of people, I'm going to be right up front with you and tell you that it doesn't matter who it is, whether we get some phenomenal results, but whether it's me or anybody, I don't care who it is, not everybody is going to apply the system. You can teach people, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they will apply it. It's like I can send you a book, but only you can actually open the front cover and start reading it. So that's the first principle. But the people that do apply it, we get a lot of people telling us, well, they're just making more money. And then what can happen then is that for somebody that wasn't able to get clients, they can get besieged with clients, which is a great problem to have. But now you've got to learn how to create systems to cope with those clients. So there are some of the steps, like in businesses, what happens is that you create a solution which in the end turns into another problem. And now you've got to solve that problem. So, for example, if you're a plumber and you've got, all of a sudden we show you techniques to get the phone to ring. We'll keep it really simple, or the phone to ring, and it's going to ring 30 times every day with a request for a new client, plus 50 clients also by email. I'm making this up. I'm exaggerating these numbers. then now you've got a problem, Matt. So now you've got to figure out, well, okay, maybe I need to hire somebody. Maybe I need to create a system. Maybe somebody else has to handle the emails. So then we look at that next level, one step at a time.
Changing direction just a little bit.
Yeah.
What's the worst advice you hear being dished out in business?
Well, I think the worst advice, I would say it's twofold. And I had somebody that recently came to a seminar, and this is going to sound really strange. I had somebody came to a seminar who was in a job, and I said at the end, what did you get? It was actually one of my clients. They brought one of their grown-up kids, yeah?
Yep.
And I said, what did you get out of the seminar? And he said, I realised I never want to be rich and I never want to be in business. And I think that's a phenomenal win because that person is really clear on what they want. But I would see a lot of other trainers trying to convince that person that they were wrong. So like another example I give is I've got a guy that washes my windows, comes around once every month or so and does the house windows. His name's Doug. And he and I get on like a house on fire. He has the simplest life. It's very different than my life financially. He just he does one house a day. He's really content. Well, I consider that a success. And so I think some of the worst advice I've ever heard is trying to convince people into something that they don't want to do. Because unless we have a lot of wealth creation seminars that people attend, and a lot of those people really deep down, they don't want to be wealthy. They just want to lead a nice, cruisy life. And who am I to say that that's wrong? It's not wrong. It's just what's right for people. So you've got to be very careful as a trainer because you've got in a position of influence and just because it's your driver to have people successful doesn't mean that it's everyone's driver. And you can confuse a lot of people and you can send people. I've seen people that have gone down the seminar road for several years that are trying to run a business and beating themselves up that they don't have more money. And I've sat down with them and go, is this what you really want? And they've gone, no. An extension to that is I went into a real estate company one time and I did a consult with the owner of that business and they had like 9 staff and huge building. And I said, what do you actually really want to do? And they said, I just want to go. I don't make any money. They were just killing themselves every week. I don't make any money. I'm running around doing all the stuff, and I don't really like running staff. I'm not very good at it, but I'm very good at just selling myself. And I said, well, why have you got all this staff, this building, this staff? And they said, well, that's what a proper business does. And I said, who says that's what? Oh, well, that's what I've read in all the books, that, you've got to have the building and the staff and, all the right system. That I go, who came up with that idea? And so what she realised is that it wasn't making her happy. It was making her incredibly stressed. She's downsized and now she's really happy. She's just running a business on her own with one assistant. She's doing really well. So these are some of the things that I see that, in my opinion, is really bad advice.
So is it your endeavour to get people, rather than just unconsciously throw yourself into this business of typical success within your business or whatever, not going through that, but to actually, you want to get people to arrive at a destination where they've chosen, that they're happy with themselves. And then do you have any thoughts on staying there? Do you allow yourself to plateau? How do you still grow from there? Are you saying that you get to a point where you can stop growing? Am I understanding that correctly or not?
I think the thing is that what I've found, I retired for a couple of years and I ended up coming back. Unfortunately, I don't need to work. If I don't want to work, I don't need to work in terms of money. So I retired for a couple of years and for the vast majority of people, particularly men, I would say, I'm not being sexist there, it's just what I've noticed, that a lot of men don't do well when they retire. And so, for the first 3 to 6 months I had the time of my life, I went surfing. I went skiing for 3 straight months, and then I came back and I went on a really long extended surf trip as well. And I was having the time of my life. I went and lived in Bali, and then I felt like I was lacking purpose. And so, your question sort of leads on to is, why are you actually in business? like, why in business in the first place? If you notice that I said, well, my business is to make money and make a contribution. It would be no joy for me to have some sort of business that created no contribution. There'd be no joy in that. It would be like, and by the way, I've found that people that just want money only, they don't do very well. They don't, and if they do well, they tend to make a lot of enemies or they lose it. I think you need a couple of reasons to run a business. And so contribution is big on I like seeing people do well. And by the way, contribution doesn't necessarily mean that I have to run a seminar. It could be, like I've read, for example, novels, and I've got a couple of favourite novels, and I love thrillers. And I've read a couple of thrillers. At the end of those thrillers, for this moment in time, hours or a day or two, that writer has transported me to another world. And I put that book down profoundly grateful that they actually spent all this time writing the book. So it could be, like if you're a plumber and my toilet's blocked up, then at that point in time, you were the most valuable person in the world to me. And so there's different ways that we can look at contribution. Like there's an old story I often tell about hundreds of years ago, it used to actually literally take hundreds of years to build those great cathedrals in Europe. And one day a priest wandered down from the Vatican and he went down to where they were building one of these cathedrals. So the people starting the cathedral, the stonemasons that were building them, they never saw the end product because it would be 200 or 300 years in the making because everything was done by hand.
Yeah, of course.
So he asked one stone, have you heard this story? He asked one stone cutter, he said, what do you do? And the first stone cutter said, I cut stone. And he walked up to another stone cutter and he said, what do you do? And he said, I cut stone into beautiful shapes. And then he walked up to the third stone cutter, somebody down the back that looked quite wise, and he said, what do you do? And the stone cutter looked him in the eye and said, I build cathedrals. So they're all doing the same thing, but there's all three different points of view. And the question is, which one's going to do a better job and which one's going to have more of an effect? So it's that point of view of, I have friends, I won't mention their name, but good friends that are elite sports people, household names. And my conversation with them is I go, well, when they've rung me up for coaching tips, I've gone, well, you can play to be the best player, in the team, or you can play for a higher causal purpose. And I said the higher causal purpose will win every time. And when we examine like elite sports people, they've got some kind of something that they're aiming for. And they very rarely reveal this, by the way.
Without saying any names, can you give an example of exactly that? Something that they may aim for above and beyond their sport?
My grandfather was in Gallipoli. And so if you talk, he's dead now. And so if you talk to those guys about why did you run out of the trenches? Was it for king and country? Was it for Australia? They said, no, I did it for my mates. It was like I needed to look after my mates. He's like, I couldn't stand, he buried his best mate twice. I mean, there's a whole other conversation about how lucky we've got in this country. People complaining in this country. He buried his best mate twice because he buried him the first time. And by the way, when he went to Gallipoli, he was 16. He lied about his age. So I said, how did you get to bury him twice? He said, well, I buried him the first time and then the Turks blew him up, so I had to bury him again. And so those guys, I'm not advocating going to war, and if people are thinking of that, they're missing the point. I have a whole different point of view, by the way, on people getting patriotic about Gallipoli because I actually saw what it did to him. It was devastating. I mean, he never recovered for the rest of his life. But that's a higher causal purpose because there's no way you're going to get out of that trench, And so a higher causal purpose in business might be I want to give my family a better life. This is the reason, by the way, that the poor immigrant moves to Australia with no money, no job prospects, can barely speak the language, and will go past a lot of people here that have had privilege, that have had education, because they wanted to create, they came from such an horrendous circumstances that they want to create a better life for their family. And so it's got to be some higher causal purpose. Like I could give you many different sporting examples, but, like in rugby league, we just had the state of origin. Well, it was just very, very clear that the Queensland team were playing, when they interviewed people, they said, well, we're playing for that jersey. That's the most oft-quoted quote. That's why they won that series. They're playing for that jersey. They're playing for their mates. They're playing for their state, whereas the other team, maybe not the same.
I think during my conversation with Steve, he quoted you actually saying that the enemy of a great life is a good life.
Exactly.
And we have it very good in this country, don't we? And until you have a look at back on Gallipoli and some things like that, and really start to look in what that meant on a day-to-day basis, you start to realise that, wow, it's a pretty good place to be, Australia.
It's a difficult place to be, but it makes people, that a lot of people are on the comfy couch. They're comfortable, and it's really hard to, well, what you don't want, if you're sitting out there listening to this, what you really don't want at the end of your life is to look back in your life and have regret. You don't want to have that. And when they interview old people in nursing homes, it's actually not the regret for the mistakes they made, it's for the life that they didn't go for.
So interesting. Okay, just a couple of questions, Brendon, then I'm going to let you get back to your day, because I know that you're about to set off on another 3 months away or something like that. Am I remembering correctly?
This one's a short trip. It's just a couple of weeks, but yeah. But okay. No, go for it, Matt.
Okay, so you mentioned books before. Do you have any book recommendations?
I would say there's a great book. I'll give you one recommendation. There's a book called How to Get Rich by Felix Dennis.
Okay.
Felix Dennis at the time was worth, when he wrote, he's dead now, but he wrote that book, he was worth $400 million. Oh, wow. So this guy knows what he's talking about. But I thought that was a great book. It's not a politically correct book. It's, he's not a seminar leader writing a book with a particular angle to get clients or anything. It's a phenomenal book. When I read that book, I went, oh, if I was going to write a book, this is a great book. And it's not politically correct, but that would be a great book I'd recommend.
What was without going into it too deeply, what was his core business out of interest?
Just trying to remember now. I've actually read that, I think it was in communications, but he started from pretty much nothing. But it's great book. There's another book, and it's called The War of Art, not to be confused with Sun Tzu's Art of War. This is The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield.
Oh, yeah.
And the first half a dozen pages of that are phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. It's just must reading. He talks about resistance, and I won't spoil it, but it's Pressfield is a very good writer as well. You don't even necessarily need to read the whole book, but the first 6 to 10 pages are phenomenal. And I think for 90% of people, it's a massive punch in the face and a wake-up call.
Which is what we all need from time to time, right? No matter who we are.
Exactly. And it comes at it from a very different angle. So I would those two books, they're good. Yeah.
If you could have one law changed, Brendon, what would it be?
Well, I think it would be a law to create less laws.
A bit overregulated?
We're overregulated and we're overgoverned, and a lot of the business people that I talk to are constantly dealing with compliance issues. And, so that would probably one law.
That's interesting. That's come up before. If you could say any one piece of advice to someone listening to this who's maybe struggling in business, wants to get ahead, wants to get their finances taken care of and sort of really get on and live out some of those, now fantasies, but the trips and that sort of thing that you do and focus on family, is there any one thing that you can say, whatever you do, just do this? Okay,
well, the starting point is we tend to get in life what we tolerate. So in my experience of training a lot of people is that it's only when you truly hate your situation that things change. And so most people just don't like their situation and put up with it. But it's only hate's a strong word, but it's only when you get to a state where I can't stand this anymore, that the brain starts looking for a way out. So I would say that if there's two roads, and that old original Miyagi, the old original movie Karate Kid, the old guy, the wise old guy Miyagi, he took the Karate Kid aside and he said, great, one side of road, very safe. Great, other side of road, very safe. Great, middle of the road, squish. And so most people are in the middle of the road. You either, move. If you don't like your situation, you either accept it and become content with it. And just rather than being stuck in this horrible place of grumbling, or you cross the road, and crossing the road is where I can't stand this anymore. I cannot stand it. I will do anything for it to change. That's when change starts to happen.
So go all in or get all out?
Yeah, all in, actually, all in or all out. Just become happy. And there's a lot of people here. I think some people are actually in the right situation. They just grumble about it. They don't realise how lucky they've got it. Other people, they need to make a change.
Is there any final words, parting advice, anything you want to say before we wrap up, Brendon?
I think we've covered it, actually. I think we've covered a lot of ground. So wherever you want to go for it. Yeah.
Now, if someone wants to, you said your programs are full at the moment, but if someone wants to get in contact with you, do you accept inquiries or anything like that?
Well, I'm pretty hard to get hold of, as you found out.
You are very hard to get hold of too. Yeah, you're right.
So if they want to there's some free resources they can get on my email list if they want to. If they go to my website, there's actually a bunch of free videos, and all they need to do is enter their first name and their email address, and we'll send them those free videos. And then from time to time, I don't bombard you, but every few weeks I send people some great tips on how to get ahead, some of the things that we've talked about today and a lot more. And they can always unsubscribe if they don't like it, But, I don't bomb them. It's just every few weeks I send some stuff out that's usually of benefit. And it's rare that I'm actually ever selling you stuff because I'm not. A lot of my programs are full, it's with repeat clients. But usually once a year, some spots open up. So, the website's brendonnichols.com, BRENDANNICHOLS.com.
I actually got those videos myself. There's 3 of them on that initial list, and that you talk a lot more about Nexus Points and Snap Points and these sort of things. So, well worth a watch and a listen if growing your business is of any interest to you. I want to thank you so much, Brendon, because I know you don't do this for many people, and I know that I'm very lucky to, first of all, just get a hold of you, but even more so for you to say, yes, I really appreciate you doing this and carving out a little bit of your time for this podcast. It's been a blast, mate. Thank you so much.
No, thanks, Matt. No, I can tell that you're really coming from the right place and want to help people, so good for you.
Cheers, mate. Appreciate it. Hey everybody, it's Matt again. Thanks for listening. Just a couple of things before you guys clock off. You can get all Trench Talk episodes at xrm.com.au/podcast. You can also sign up for other goodies at the same site. Just plonk your email in there and you are covered. That's X for X-ray, R for Romeo, M for Mike.com.au/podcast. If you really like what I'm bringing you, please head to iTunes, subscribe to this show and leave a review right there. And lastly, if you want to contact me directly, type the @ followed by Mr. Matt Reynolds into your search bar and you'll find all the social links. Goodbye.